The night she left me, Claire looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Daniel, you'll never be successful enough for me." 10 years later, she walked into a job interview. "At my company, my name is Daniel. I'm 32. And if you told the 22-year-old version of me that I'd one day say those words out loud without shaking, I wouldn't have believed you." Back then, I was a broke senior with a part-time pizza job, a second-hand laptop that doubled as a space heater, and a faith in love so stubborn it made me ignore every warning sign waving like a parade. I met Claire in a campus coffee shop that always smelled like burnt espresso and finals week panic. She had the kind of face that made professors forgive late papers and strangers hold doors a beat longer than necessary. We locked eyes over a wobbly table, and she smiled like she was in on a joke the rest of the world had missed. We talked for 2 hours about nothing and everything: bad novels, better movies, why the library's air conditioning was always broken, how we both wanted to make something with our lives. She asked what I did. I said, "Computer science," and braced for the polite nod. Instead, she said, "So, you speak fluent future." I fell a little in love on the spot. We started small, cheap tacos on Tuesdays, late-night study sessions where I fixed her formatting while she fixed my commas, walking back to our dorms under streetlights that hummed like they were overhearing secrets. She told me money didn't matter, that she wanted someone who saw her. I wanted to be that person so badly that I made a religion of it. The first red flags were pale. She'd say, "It'd be nice to go somewhere with real tablecloths," then kiss me like the comment was a joke. She'd post photos with captions like, "Manifesting a life that fits." I told myself everyone dreams out loud sometimes. I didn't notice how often the dream had a price tag. We slid into something that felt like a life. I worked the campus help desk fixing printers that only jammed for angry seniors. At night, I delivered pizzas in a dented Corolla that sagged left from a lifetime of wrong turns. Claire had a campus job at an office with succulents and affirmations on the wall, until she quit because the manager was creepy. I covered more dates. When the engine light in her car flashed, I put the bill on my card because safety first. When rent spiked for her shared apartment, I spotted her because the landlord was, taking advantage of young women. It all sounded virtuous when I narrated it that way. Love makes you a good storyteller, mostly to yourself. Senior spring, a friend's dad got me an interview for a junior developer role at a health tech company downtown. I wore a tie that made my neck itch and rehearsed answers in the mirror, like I was auditioning for a version of me with steadier hands. When the offer came, it felt like oxygen. Claire smiled and said, "That's great, babe, but you deserve more. We deserve more." I didn't know how to hold both pride and apology in one chest. I tried. Around the same time, Claire started networking, she said it like it was a class. She met people at panels, coffees, rooftop bars that existed at a price range I couldn't see from ground level. One of those people was Nathan, older by a few years, finance job, black BMW. Watch like a small mirror. "He's just helping me," she said. "He knows the industry." Her phone blinked his name at midnight, and the next morning she swore it was a group chat. I didn't push. I wanted trust to count as evidence. The night everything broke, I was an hour late getting home because a server went down, and our ops guy had the flu. I walked into our apartment, a place we were calling ours more often, and found a table set with candles and plates I recognized from the thrift store. A man stood in my kitchen laughing like he'd been told it belonged to him. Claire looked at me and didn't flinch. "You're late," she said, as if the only calculation in the room was my timekeeping. "What is this?" I asked. She tilted her head. "This is Nathan. We've been talking. I told him we were done." The word we fell out of the story like a rung snapping off a ladder. Nathan, his name fit his shirt, said, "I didn't know." But he knew. He had eyes, and there was my mail on the counter. I wanted to shout. Instead, I put my keys down slowly so I wouldn't throw them, and said, "You told him we're done?" Claire nodded, like she was confirming a meeting time. "Daniel, you're good, but I can't build a future with someone who has no ambition." She stepped closer, voice low and tender, as if she were doing me a kindness. "You'll never be successful enough for me." It was a line she'd been saving. I felt it slice clean. I stood there feeling my face burn and nodded because I couldn't trust my voice. I left with my keys and the not cry I'd been holding pressed so hard in my jaw that my mouth tasted like copper. I slept on a friend's couch that night. At dawn, I walked the city with no destination and made a quiet promise that felt like flipping a switch. No one would ever get to use enough as a weapon on me again. Not because I'd prove them wrong, because I'd decide my own measure. What comes next isn't a montage. It's a grind. I said yes to every backlog ticket they threw at me. I stayed late to watch the ops guy recover a database. I asked stupid questions and wrote them down like they were gold. I got certified in every cloud thing we touched, and half the ones we didn't. I ate rice and beans, brewed coffee at home, and let my shoes do another season. When friends went out Friday nights, I took a second screen home and built small tools no one asked for. I put $20 a week toward debt and $40 toward a savings account named Runway. I didn't tell anyone about. At 26, a startup I'd been quietly contracting for offered me a full-time seat. 5 of us in a room that used to be a chiropractor's office, 2 whiteboards, 1 coffee machine that screamed like a train. We were building a platform doctors could actually use without cursing. I slept under my desk twice the first month. When we shipped our first usable prototype, a clinic signed on. Then 2. Investors started visiting. I learned how to talk without translating from code in my head. I learned how to say we and mean it. At 28, the acquisition talks started. I assumed I was too small to matter. I also knew how many nights and weekends I'd put into our belly. Our CEO called me into a glass-walled conference room and said, "We want you to stay on through integration. Your equity is going to be worth something." I nodded like I understood, then went home and Googled everything twice. When the day came, I watched zeros appear like a glitch, and then stay. 7 figures in my account. I took a picture of my phone, then deleted it, because the last thing I wanted was proof I didn't know how to emotionally compute what mattered to numbers. I didn't buy a car, I didn't buy a watch. I took 2 days off and slept. On day 3, I registered an LLC for a company I'd been sketching in notebooks between sprint planning and code reviews. We would build software for clinics that couldn't afford the giants, and were tired of duct taping spreadsheets to care. I hired 2 people I trusted and 2 people I didn't know and wanted to. We rented a weird, bright corner of a building above a bakery and used free bread to bribe our ideas to behave. When you own the thing, your name and your nerves share a bloodstream. The first 6 months, I woke up every night at 3:11, convinced I'd forgotten to do something critical. The next 6 months, I woke up at 3:11 because I had done something critical, and now it had consequences. We shipped anyway. Clinics signed anyway. We made the first hire I didn't technically need, but practically did. A marketing director named Priya, who could translate "we built a better widget" into "this will make your Tuesday less hellish." Claire existed somewhere else. Sometimes a photo of her would pass through my feed by algorithm accident. Her on a balcony with Nathan, her hands glittering with something expensive that caught other people's approval in the comments. They got married at a vineyard with glasses that looked like they'd break if you said student loans near them. She wrote captions about finding your forever. I wasn't jealous. I felt like I was reading someone else's novel, where the ending had been spoiled. Then the tone changed. Fewer vacations. More quotes about starting over and healing. A mutual friend told me Nathan had cheated with their nanny in a plot twist so cliche it felt like it had been sponsored by karma. The prenup had bite. She left with not much more than luggage that carried itself. I thought that was the last time her name would visit my head. The universe likes a callback. On a Monday, with the particular fluorescent sadness only offices can make, Priya dropped a stack of resumes on my desk. "We need a marketing coordinator who can actually write and won't faint at Google Analytics," she said. I flipped through, looking for verbs that did work. Page 5 stopped me. Claire Bennett. The headshot had been taken by a professional who knew how to make light feel like apology. The resume was fine. Assistant roles, some freelance PR, a certificate from an online course with a name that sounded like a cult in pastels. Nothing that screamed yes. Nothing that warned me what walking into that interview would feel like. I laughed. Out loud. Priya raised an eyebrow. "That good?" "That familiar," I said. "Bring her in." 2 days later, the conference room had that pre-interview quiet where people rearrange their confidence while looking at glass. I sat at the head of the table in a suit that fit me like someone had measured where I stood when I was hopeful and cut the fabric there. Claire walked in, and the moment she saw me, her posture collapsed a centimeter. "Daniel?" she said, and it was less a greeting than a confession that the narrative had slipped. "Ms. Bennett," I said, using the name the resume had been proud of. "Have a seat." She did the thing she's always done well. Started talking. Passion for brand stories. Natural connector. Agile and fast-paced environments. I asked questions I'd ask anyone. Tell me about a campaign that underperformed and what you changed. What's the difference between brand voice and tone? If you had $1,000 and 1 week, how would you get 50 qualified leads for a niche B2B product? She answered like a person who had read good answers. She was rusty in the places that only ship time sands smooth. When it was over, she stood at the door like the first time something has ever felt like a wall. "I didn't know this was yours," she said. "Yeah," I said, feeling how simple that word can be when it's been carried a long way. "It is?" "You look incredible," she said, softening the word so it wouldn't make her bite her tongue. "Funny," I said. "That's what you always wanted. Someone who could give you the life you deserved." She flinched. She had saved lines too. I could see her reaching for one and coming up empty. She left. When Priya asked if we should move her to the next round, my logic and my history argued in a way my therapist would have liked to monetize. I said yes. Not because I was feeling generous, because I wanted to see what truth would do when it had to show up Monday at 9 o'clock. We hired her at a fair salary with a clear job description and a manager who wasn't me. She sat 2 floors down, where the marketing team had whiteboards filled with arrows and jokes that only made sense if you'd been in the room when someone had slept too little. The first weeks, she was polite to everyone and invisible to me. I gave an all-hands talk about a big clinic we'd landed. She clapped at the appropriate volume. She started writing copy for landing pages, emails, case studies. The work was decent. When Priya edited, it became good. When data came back, Claire learned. I saw her once in the kitchen, staring into the fridge like it held a second chance behind the oat milk. She turned, smiled that familiar muscle memory, and said, "Dan, could we—" "No," I said gently. "Whatever you want to say to Priya." It took 3 months for her to ask for a meeting. She came to my office, hands folded like a student called up to read. "I owe you an apology," she said. "You owe a lot of things to a lot of people," I said. It wasn't a line. It was history in a sentence. "I was cruel," she said, "and shallow, and stupid. I thought money would protect me from ever feeling small again. I made you small to keep my illusion big. Silence is a tool if you let it be." I used it until she had to fill it with something that felt like effort. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice carried the weight of someone not used to lifting anything heavy without help. "You didn't lose me," I said finally. "You threw me away." She wiped at her eye like she was removing evidence. "Do you think we could ever—" "No," I said, "because I don't recycle." People imagine that line lands like a slap. It didn't. It landed like a door closing with the click that means the latch found the frame it was made for. She resigned a week later. HR did the polite dance. Priya asked if there was something we could have done differently. I said, "We did our job." She did hers. Sometimes the edges don't fit. On Claire's last day, I watched from behind glass as she carried a cardboard box to a car that wasn't German. The symmetry was not lost on me, but it also wasn't the point. You think that's the end? It wasn't. Life doesn't cut to black when you say a satisfying line. 2 months later, a LinkedIn message arrived from Claire. "Thank you for the opportunity. I learned more in 3 months than I did in 3 years. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed you to know I'm trying to be better." I didn't respond. Not because I wanted her to hurt. Because the conversation had moved on to a place where replies weren't the currency. In the meantime, the company grew. We hired a head of customer success who could calm a storm with an email. We rolled out a feature that saved nurses 30 minutes a shift, and nurses wrote us notes that sounded like relief. We did our first user conference in a hotel whose carpet was proof that humans should not be allowed to design carpets. I gave a keynote in a suit that I forgot I was wearing because it felt like a shirt with extra confidence sewn into the seams. Afterward, a clinic manager hugged me with a ferocity that stole a minute from my life and said, You made Tuesday not awful. That's success. Everything else is decimals. People ask me about Claire sometimes because they like their entrepreneur stories with a garnish. I don't tell them much. I say, I dated someone once who taught me what not to build my life on. If they press, I say, love and ambition aren't enemies unless you pit them against each other. If they keep pressing, I talk about code because there's a way to end any conversation politely if you introduce recursion. There were moments after she left that hurt later than scheduled. Sitting on a balcony in a city I could now afford to visit, and realizing I'd written that moment in my head 100 times with her in it. Listening to a song I used to like, and remembering a car ride filled with a silence that meant I wasn't keeping up with the life she wanted to borrow. Little hauntings that felt less like ghosts and more like a messy apartment you hadn't gotten around to cleaning. I cleaned, I repainted, I hung different art. It looked like a place I lived on purpose. A year after Claire resigned, I got coffee with Priya to talk about the next quarter. She said, out of curiosity, why did you hire her at all? I took a breath I didn't know I'd been preparing and said, to make sure the story in my head matched the one in the world. To prove to myself I didn't need to win at her to have won at me. Priya nodded like she collects answers like that, and files them under humans are weird, but sometimes tolerable. I ran into Claire once more. A random Tuesday at a grocery store where the apples looked too perfect to have grown on Earth. She was holding an avocado like it was a verdict. She saw me, squared her shoulders into someone braver than she felt, and said, "You won." "No," I said. "I just stopped playing your game." I meant it. Winning implies someone else lost me. I didn't want that responsibility again. I went home and made a ridiculous salad that tasted like summer pretending it could last, and I sat on my balcony, the real one, with a view that included both the river and the alley that sometimes smelled like honest work. And I felt something so uncinematic, it was almost unshareable. Peace. Not because karma had delivered a TV-worthy twist, not because my cufflinks gleamed under fluorescent lights that were now my lights, because I had a Tuesday that wasn't awful, because I had a team that showed up, because I had learned to measure my worth in ways that didn't require a witness. If there's a lesson, it's not the meme version. It's not get rich and make your ex regret everything. Regret isn't a currency you can spend. It's not even a reliable product. Some days it shows up, some days it ghosts you. The lesson I hold is simpler, harder, and slower. Decide what enough is before someone else sells you theirs. Build a life that pays you back on boring days. Keep the receipts you actually need. Proof of who you were when no one would have bet on you. Proof of who you refused to become when it would have been easy. The night she left me, Claire looked me in the eyes and said, "You'll never be successful enough for me." 10 years later, she walked into a job interview at my company. That isn't fate. That's math. That's choices compounded. That's a kid in a coffee shop deciding that the story he tells himself has to be kinder than the ones other people write for him. She left me for a rich man. I didn't become a rich man despite her. I became a whole man because I wanted to be someone I wouldn't leave. And yes, on a certain kind of day, it is a particular flavor of satisfaction to sign paychecks in a building with my name on the lease. But the better taste is this. I rinse the coffee pot at night so the morning version of me doesn't hate the evening version. I am the person who remembers to do for myself what I used to do to prove I belong to someone else. If you're listening and you're in a version of what I was in, someone telling you you'll never be enough unless you become something that serves them, here's your permission slip, printed in the only ink that matters. Stop. Open a spreadsheet if you must. Count what you're spending and who's profiting. Decide on a number for peace, then pay yourself in small, unglamorous choices until you own it. You don't need an audience. You don't need a witness. You don't need a rooftop or a watch that reflects the sun into other people's eyes. You need a Tuesday that doesn't hurt. When I lock the office at night, the hallway lights flicker like they're listening. I take the stairs because the elevator sounds like a rumor. Outside, the bakery downstairs smells like sugar bribing flour to behave. I stand for a minute and watch people carry their lives in paper bags that will rip if you put too much in them. And I think, me too. So I adjust. I take some weight out. I ask for help if there's someone there who knows how to carry in a way that doesn't make me smaller. Then I go home and I make a decent dinner. And I text my team a bad joke. And I sleep without waking up at 3:11 to check if the universe still remembers my name. It does. But more importantly, I do. And every now and then, rarely, because busy is honest, but sometimes I remember Claire at that conference room table and me at the head of it, and the way stories can double back to show you what you've learned. I don't feel triumph, I feel relief. The distance between who I was and who I am fits me like a suit someone cut with kindness. She left me for a rich man. Now she works for the company I own. That's not revenge. That's a summary. The real ending happens in small, repeatable ways the algorithm doesn't reward. I choose myself, and I keep choosing.